All right, well, welcome everyone to today's Learning Network webinar. We are joined by Jonathan Schroeder from IPUMS, who will give us a tour of the census data here in the US and kind of how we use that for our health planning, research, and grant writing. And I will give it to him. Thank you.
Thanks, Nishka. Thank you for joining me and us today. I am Jonathan Schroeder. I work at IPUMS at the University of Minnesota. I am not a public health researcher myself. I'm a geographer by training, but we have a lot of health researchers who use the data that we provide through IPUMS. And I think it can be a great benefit. I hope many of you have at least heard of us. Maybe you've used us. I'm expecting a whole range of backgrounds in my talk today. And my main objective is to give you a really good overview of the kinds of resources and that we provide and what you could do with them. I am not an expert on all of the areas of health research that you could apply these things in, but I know they are extremely beneficial for a lot of different types of research. And I think I'll allude to several of those as I go through. So what is IPUMS? We pronounce it as IPUMS, not IPUMS, because it was initially called the Integrated Public Use Microdata Series. That's what it originally stood for. And the I was for integrated, and it was convenient to use the same short I sound. It is no longer the Integrated Public Use Microdata Series. That was a specific product that we produced. And since then, we have expanded over the last over 25 years now to include a whole variety of data that are not just microdata, but other types of data as well. So we are a general data provider of both US and international data. We focus on censuses and major nationwide surveys. And we take the data and we improve it, we enhance it by integrating it across time and space, making concepts more consistent in their coding and how you can measure and compare them. IPUMS is data, IPUMS is websites, IPUMS has documentation, and IPUMS are us, the people who work here and can help you with figuring out how to use the data. So IPUMS is a whole collection of all of these things, and hopefully can be a great benefit to you and your institutions. So why would it be beneficial? We have an incredible breadth and depth of scope. We have data, as I said, covering the US and international subjects. Our harmonization and enhancements make the data much easier to use than if you go to original sources in many cases. We have a lot of options and ways that you can customize the data that you get from us so that it is focused on the concepts that are of interest to you. And we have some online data analysis tools so that you don't necessarily have to be an expert in statistical software packages to make sense of things. You can do some things online. We have comprehensive documentation so that you can read up on how concepts have changed over time. And we also do user support. So we are here 24/7, available by email and by our user forum to help you with questions you have about our data. On top of all that, you can get that all for free. Our only requirement is that before you download data, you register with us so that we can keep track of how many users we have, provide us a little information about what you're planning to do with the data, where you work, so we can monitor what our user needs are. We only use your email to keep you informed of IPUMS data releases and to alert you to when your data are ready to download. And the only requirement is that you agree to a few use terms, which include generally that you cite us when you publish anything based on our data, and that you do not redistribute the data without permission. But we do actually have many cases where we do allow users to redistribute IPUMS data if you choose. So today I'm going to start with a big overview of all of the things in IPUMS, but I'm going to focus mainly on two IPUMS projects, the ones that I focus the most on in my own work. As I said, I'm a geographer, and I focus on the US census data projects. And the one that I work on the most is our geographic US Census project. That's NHGIS, which I'll talk about the most. As time allows towards the end, I will also talk about IPUMS USA, which is our US Census microdata project. At the end, we hope to save a bunch of time for Q&A. I can only speculate as to how the data would be useful to you. So I would love to hear from participants on any specific questions they have about their own needs and how our data could be useful for them. This is our main web portal, ipums.org. And what you'll see immediately as you arrive here is that there are several different flavors of IPUMS. These are each what we call an IPUMS project that provides a different type of census data or survey data. What specifically do we provide? Just a second, let me hide my video panel because it's taking up some room on my screen. There we go. What's in IPUMS? We've got these 9 major categories of projects. And of these, most provide microdata. Microdata is data for individual respondents to a census or survey. It provides all of the responses that an individual provided. And in all cases here, it is anonymized so that you cannot determine who responded, but you can then do all sorts of analysis of the different covariates of responses. And you can tabulate the data in all kinds of different ways. We also have a couple projects here that provide summary data, published tables that are already cross-tabulated for a particular purpose. And in this case, they are geographic summary data. These are summary statistics, counts and medians for geographic areas. So in these summary data, as I said, the observation units would be geographic areas. Like in our US Census data, you can get data for the nation or for states or for counties, census tracts, block groups, all the way down to individual census blocks and lots of other areas that relate to these others in different ways. For example, county subdivisions nest within counties. For example, they make up New England towns and towns in various other states. But microdata, as I said, is data for individual respondents. So the specific households and persons that responded to a survey, which gives you great flexibility and in how you prefer to classify individuals and their responses, how you choose to cross-tabulate things, compared to the summary data, where you're restricted to only the cross-tabulations that the census or statistical agency chose to publish. Why would you choose to restrict yourself to specific summary tables that were published? Because microdata usually have very restricted geographic detail. In order to maintain the anonymity of respondents, they cannot provide very specific detail about where the individual lived. So if you want small area data for specific neighborhoods, you might want to get tract level data or block group level data, summary statistics for those areas, rather than getting it from the microdata where you would not be able to identify those areas. In many cases, microdata also have limited sample sizes. Summary data can be based on the complete census and be very accurate for these different areas, whereas microdata are usually microdata samples of the whole population. So you're getting estimates rather than full data. The summary data would look like this. This is a table in a GIS software package where each row corresponds to a geographic area. Here, these rows correspond to tracts in Baltimore in 1950. This is from NHGIS, and this last column provides the total population of each tract. With this kind of data, you can do mapping and spatial analysis, right? So here's an example where National Geographic used block data from NHGIS to produce nationwide maps of the ethnic makeup of census blocks across the entire country. Microdata doesn't look so intelligible when you look at it initially. It's a whole lot of numbers here, but with some additional information, you can identify which of these columns mean what. And in this case, each row corresponds to an individual respondent to a census survey. You can identify how each individual related to the head of household, what the marital status is, what the education level is, what their occupation is. And there's different blocks of respondents here that each correspond to an individual household. So you can also do all sorts of analysis of how characteristics of one member of the household affect the characteristics of other members of the household. So you could analyze children by what the characteristics of their parents are within that household. A very useful feature. Here's an example of how microdata have been used in popular media in the New York Times. They were able to compare how wages have changed by job group from 1980 on this end of each line to 2014 on the far end of each line. And they color these lines by the gender, the sex of each individual, and each line represents a different occupation, and the height of each line represents the actual wages. And having that richness of detail is something that you can't usually get from summary data. You need the microdata in order to get all of these characteristics and show all of them on a single image like this. So we talked about the difference between microdata and summary data. We also have both US data and international data. We have both census data and various types of survey data. The current population survey is actually operated by the Census Bureau, but it is a sample of the population. And we hear about it most often when we are presented with new employment statistics every month, but it actually covers a lot of different characteristics. And it has a unique feature of being a longitudinal survey so that it actually resamples the same household multiple times over the course of a year. Some very useful things you can do with that. I won't be talking about it too much today, but you might want to look into it. We do have surveys on health for both international surveys and the US. I won't talk about these as much either because my own interest is in geography, and these surveys are not very detailed in their geographic information. They are, if you wanted to do a cross-national analysis, you can compare multiple countries, and there is some information about where specific individuals live in the global health surveys. In the US health surveys data, there's very limited geographic information, but you can get really rich detail about responses across a wide variety of health-related questions from that product. So if you're interested in that, please check it out. I won't be talking about that too much more today. Additionally, we have data from a time use survey for the US and internationally, which basically reports how people have spent their time throughout a random day in the year. And we have another product for surveys of higher educational institutions and the workforce. As I was saying, the most detailed geographic information you can get is from NHGIS our National Historical Geographic Information Survey system, which is the product I work on. That's summary data for very small areas. We also have an international product that is relatively new and doesn't cover much of the globe, but it does cover a few countries, and we have started providing data for very small units, all the way down. In the case of NHGIS, we go all the way down to blocks. We do have some sub-state geographic detail in our microdata products, and then somewhat less in some of these other products. But yeah, IPUMS health surveys, we have no data down to the state level. So it's really not very detailed if you want to study a particular community. We also have GIS data that allows you to map the data for our microdata products and for our summary data products, and some specialized GIS data for some of the global health data. My expertise, as I've said, is on the geographic data. I work with particularly US Census summary data, but I also work with the US microdata and the international summary data. So I'll proceed to focus on some of those subjects. NHGIS is our project to provide geographic US Census and survey data for the entire US. We provide both summary tables and GIS files all the way back to 1790. That's where the H in NHGIS comes from. It is a historical project, but it is also a contemporary project, and we try to keep it up to date with the most recent census and American Community Survey data. So you can use it to get data right up to the present. For example, to get this block level data that National Geographic used. We also have a very unique product that you can't get from the Census Bureau. We have time series and geographic crosswalks that standardize concepts across time in summary data, so that you could get, for example, population that is Black in Charlotte, North Carolina by census tract, going back to 1990 for consistent census units. These are 2010 census tracts, and every 10 years, the definitions of census tracts change, so the boundaries don't match up, and it's no longer possible to compare the data from one year directly with another year. So we create estimates that allow you to directly compare the 1990 data with the 2010 data. And we also have geographic crosswalks. So if there's something that we haven't included in our time series, these geographic crosswalks allow you to match up any data from 1990 through 2020 into consistent units. One thing that I want to emphasize about NHGIS is that we are a data source. We're a place where you can come to download data files. We do not provide on NHGIS any mapping tools or analysis tools, so that you can't actually view the data within our website. You have to download the data and then use your own chosen package, Excel or a statistical software package or a GIS software package to do your analysis. Here's an example of something that someone used our data to do. This is an online mapping tool that shows the distribution of population by educational attainment throughout the country. Each dot is colored according to a different level of educational attainment and represents about 50 people each. What you could do with our website is not create this map, but actually download the data files that would allow you to do that. So you can get, and this is a GIS software package, ArcGIS Pro. You can get the shapefile that shows where all of the boundaries of these block groups are, and you can get a summary table that identifies how many people there are of each different level of educational attainment. You can join these two together and then produce a map in a GIS software package, or in R, for example, has mapping utilities. There's a variety of ways you could do that. Another feature of our website is that most of our data are available in nationwide files. And for anything above the block group level, we only provide nationwide files. This is a small burden for people who really just want to get data for a particular county or a particular city. you have to download data for the entire country, but then within that, you would get the data for your area of interest. It is a benefit for many users who do want to do nationwide analysis because a lot of other sources of data, including the census website, make it rather difficult to get entire nationwide coverage of small areas. And that is our default on NHGIS. And lastly, we are principally funded by the National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health, which means that we can provide all of this for free. Compare that to the Census Bureau's main source of main online source of data, data.census.gov. As I said, it is difficult to get nationwide statistics for, say, all census tracts in the country through this website. It is designed to have you select particular states or particular counties. It is also designed to provide the data directly through the web interface, which complicates the interface because there's a lot of controls here to be able to control exactly what you're looking at. Some people find it rather hard to sort through many tables here. And our site is really geared towards making it easy to customize a data request and get a particular data file. You can get multiple tables. You can explore multiple years of data at once. You can get historical data, which is not available through the census website as well. And you can also get the GIS boundary files through the same interface when you use NHGIS. And that's not the case through the census. They provide their GIS data through an entirely different interface. So how would it work if you wanted to get data through NHGIS? Let's do a quick walkthrough. Come to the NHGIS website, nhgis.org. The main place you want to focus on if you're looking for data is this button in the middle of the page, Get Data. If you click on that, you go to our data finder and you'll see this view. Initially, you don't see many options. You don't see many data options, what's available, because no filters are selected. So the first thing you need to do is click on one of these four filter types: geographic levels, years, topics, or data sets. Let's say I click on topics and I choose the journey to work topic, and then I'm presented with a list of different types of data that are available pertaining to that topic. They go all the way back to 1960. This is the earliest data set that includes data for Journey to Work. And currently what I'm looking at are what we call source tables. These are tables that were originally defined in a census data product or a different source. And we just provide those to you in basically the same structure as they were originally produced by the census. We also have what we call time series tables, and these are NHGIS customized tables that link together data across time, so that you could, for example, get data from 1970 through the 2012 5-year period, all in one table. And now actually we have updated these tables more recently to include 2019 5-year data from the American Community Survey, as well as 2010 and 2020 census data where possible. And in this last tab, you'd see our GIS files. And these files wouldn't have data about Journey to Work in them, but these files would give the boundaries of units like 1960 census tracts, for which we do have Journey to Work tables. So you could get a 1960 census tract shapefile that identifies the boundaries of 1960 tracts, and then also download a table that summarizes population by their means of transportation by 1960 census tract, and then you can map those two things. So for example, with this specific case, what you'd want to get is block group data from the 2011 to 2015 ACS 5-year period for educational attainment. In that case, you'd probably want to select filters like this, the block group, geographic level, years 2011 to 2015, and the educational attainment topic. And then you would see these tables are available. You can't see the data itself through our web interface, but you could click on any of these underlined items to learn more about what the contents of the table are. So if you clicked on this, you could see exactly which counts are available in the table, which includes a count of all population age 16 to 19, the total population, the male population, and so on. But notice that this universe is limited to only the population 16 to 19, which is not what I want to map in this case. How do I find the table that I do want to use? A common thing that users would want to do on our web interface is sort by popularity. And we allow you to do that by just clicking on this header, and that brings up the tables that are most commonly downloaded on our website, which is often the data that would be of most use and interest to you. Starting, for example, with this first table, educational attainment for the population 25 years and over, which is the table that is mapped in that example that I shared. So that's the table I would want to select. I would click on this plus symbol, and then that would add it to my data cart. This is a little like working through an online shopping experience. What you're going to do is select some products, and when you're done, you'll go ahead and submit the request for those products, and then eventually the data will be available to you after a few minutes, usually on an HGIS, or sometimes less. So first, I've added this table to my data cart, and now I go over to the GIS files, and I add a block group shapefile for the entire United States to my data cart. And now I have both a source table and a GIS file, and I would continue by clicking here. I can review my selections, and then on the final page, I can choose some options for how I would like the data to be formatted and what its extent will be. For block and block group data, we allow you to select which states you would like using this selection option here. You could click on all, and then you would get all states, block group data for all states in the country in one file. So once I've done that, I can also choose which file structure I would get, whether I want it to be a comment delimited file or a fixed width file, which comes with some command packages or command files for specific statistical packages. So if you want to load the data into SAS or Stata or SPSS, I would recommend using this. We have some command files that would allow you to do that very expediently. You can also choose whether you want to include, with ACS data, the estimates and the margins of error are two different types of data. You can have those in one file or in separate files. I would add a little description here of what I'm downloading, because once I've downloaded it, it will show up in my own personal listing of past requests, and this description will appear there, and I'll know which request I made for this particular subject. I'll show you that in a minute here, but let's submit. If I haven't logged in yet, I will have to log in now. And at this point, you can also register. If you haven't registered yet, you can create an account. And once you've done that and you've logged in, you'll come to our downloads page where you'll see that the request has started. This would be spinning to show you that it's currently being worked on by our system. Our automated system will produce a set of custom data files for you, and when they're ready, they will appear under this download data column. You can click on that, and you would be able to download either tables or GIS files in separate downloads. And then, of course, you would have this data that you could bring into a software package and create a map. Okay, so with the remaining time, I'm going to spend the first part of it giving you an overview of key NHGIS resources, the source tables, the time series tables, the GIS files, and some other features of our website that can be really handy for understanding what's available. And once I'm done with that, I'll move on to IPUMS USA and go into some more details on that. So back on our main website, on the main web page, there's this menu on the left that gives you lots of different options and a lot of different resources we have there, including this page, which summarizes data availability. So if you're curious about what kinds of data are available in NHGIS, this is a good place to start. We list here a bunch of highlights for our summary tables. A couple things that I think might be most relevant to the City Match audience is that we also have some vital stats data through 2007, not super recent, but that it does include birth and death data by county and some marriage and divorce data up to 2010, down to the county level. We also have school attendance area data. So if any of you do studies at the school level, we had this project going for a little while around the 2010 census. We produced data for school attendance areas as they were defined for the 10-11, 11-12, and 12-13 school years. Not for the entire nation, but for a large portion of it. You can get specific school attendance areas for specific schools. That's more specific than school districts. And then we also tabulated 2010 census data for those areas. Farther down, you'll see this PDF file that provides complete NHGIS table availability by topic and source. If I click on that, I get this PDF, and I zoom in on that, you can see each different topic that appears in our data finder is listed here. And then across these columns, you can see different major types of data sets. The American Community Survey is a program that the Census Bureau runs and asks a really wide variety of questions of the entire US population every year. We have on NHGIS releases of ACS data from the 2009 year release through 2020 release. And it covers a very wide variety of subjects, including some questions about births by mother. How many births have you had? I think is one of the summary statistics that they include. Marriage and divorce, and so on. Over here, we have these vital stats data sets that I talked about, and it shows you that we have births and deaths data for those as well. Farther down the list, you'll see things like household relationship, children in the households, literacy, type of school. The literacy question was asked only in much earlier censuses, but we have school enrollment information and so on. We also in the ACS have data on disability and health insurance, as well as a variety of income and public assistance questions, and so on. Back on our main page, another place where you can learn about what we have available is this overview of data sets page, which lists all of the major data sets that we have added to our collection. So, for example, you could learn more about what is in the 1970 census, what types of data sets are there. And then in the tabular data sources page, you can get the original source documentation of these various data sets and learn more about how different concepts were measured across time, what the questionnaires actually had on them. This is all within this these PDFs that describe the original data products. Forthcoming, how soon do we get out new data, and when do we do that? The ACS produces 1-year summary file data every September. So next month that'll come out, and we usually get that out within 6 weeks of the original release. 5-year data comes out in December, and we usually get that out within 4 business weeks. And that usually means that it's out just after the holidays on our site. The 2020 census summary files are still coming out from the 2020 decennial census. We currently have on our site the redistricting data, which is a fairly limited set of statistics, mainly about race and ethnicity, and a few high-level things like occupancy and vacancy of households, of housing units. The more detailed data will be coming out next year in May, and then additional other detailed data about specific ethnic groups and about household relationships. That'll be coming out later next year. One of the reasons why it's so long delayed, they used to produce decennial census data sooner than this, after the decennial census, but this year, for the 2020 census, they are completely revamping how they protect privacy in the 2020 decennial census. And they are now adding statistical noise, small errors to most of the statistics to make it harder to reconstruct individual level data from the census summary statistics. And in order to understand how much noise they're adding, they have also produced demonstration data where they have applied the same system to original 2010 census data. And another special product that we have on our site on NHGIS is this demonstration data from 2010. So if you're curious, if you'd like to learn more about how noisy this new data is going to be, it's really going to have pretty significant impacts on small area data, especially at the block level, which will no longer be very reliable in the 2020 data. If you'd like to understand how unreliable it is, you could use this privacy protected 2010 census demonstration data to investigate that and learn more about it. There's various links here that would give you more information about what's changing. Moving on to another of our key resources, our GIS files. We also have on our data availability page some information about what GIS files we have available, how far back in time that goes. We also have a dedicated GIS files page that provides background on how we generated these GIS files and their sources. One particular data set that I want to promote, because we are working a lot on this right now and have just last week put out a new big batch of this, our 1980 block boundaries. So we had from the Census Bureau block boundary data going back to 1990, and now we are extending that back to 1980 so that you can get really small area detail down to the census block back to 1980. Just last week, we released new block boundaries covering New York and LA, Baltimore and Atlanta. So our list has grown quite long. We cover a lot of the major metros. Here's an example of what you could do with that. A couple summers ago, we had diversity fellows here at our center produce these maps and produce a blog post linked here that investigated how the racial geography of the Twin Cities of Minnesota corresponds to restrictive racial covenants that were in effect earlier in the century. And you can see in this area that there are apparently some lingering effects to where there were racial covenants on specific properties in this area of South Minneapolis, and where the Black population lives even through today. They tend not to have moved into these areas that had racial covenants, which is very concerning, and something that a lot of researchers are digging into more. Lastly, a really important product that I spend a lot of time on is our time series and crosswalks. We try to really make it a lot easier for our users to compare concepts across time. So you can learn more about the time series tables through this webpage here, the time series tables webpage, which provides a lot of background here. This is an example of a downloaded time series table. This is at the state level, marital status, summaries of population by marital status going back to 1970. So you can see counts for each state here. The concepts have been standardized so that each column measures the same thing. We've got one time series of male never married, and then we've got another time series of male now married, and it goes on and continues with additional time series across the entire table. And we've put all of the data for a single state on a single row so that you can directly compare these things. This is not a Census Bureau product. This is something that you can uniquely get from NHGIS. This particular table is using what we call nominal integration to match geographies across time. With nominal integration, all we have done is linked together names and codes of geographic areas across time, so that this row represents the data that was associated with Alabama in each of these years. And that works really well for things like states where the boundaries don't change at all. But when you look at things like census tracts, where the boundaries often change, you get a lot of empty cells here because this particular census tract 1502, existed only in 1970 and then not again in later years. So when we do the nominal integration, we have nothing to match up with it in these later years. You could still use this data to produce snapshot maps of the 1970 characteristics and the 1980 characteristics and so on, but you couldn't really use this table to measure change at all within these areas. So for that, we also have what we call geographically standardized tables, where we have taken historical data from 1990 and 2000, and now also from 2020, and we have estimated how that data is would have been tabulated had we used 2010 census geographies. So in this case, each row is a 2010 census tract, and we have estimates of what the 1990 characteristics are and the 2000 characteristics are for each 2010 census tract. And as of today, we also have 2020 data in this same format. You'll see we also have lower and upper bounds on these estimates. In some cases, those exactly match the 1990 original total. In some cases, they don't. What is that about? Well, the way that we produce these estimates is we start from the smallest possible units. In 1990, the smallest units for which the census provided data were blocks. And you can see those in pale red here. These are the 1990 blocks. And in this green color, you can see the 2010 tracts. We need to estimate 1990 characteristics of these 2010 tracts. So what we do is we sum up all of the block characteristics within each of those tracts. And in these eastern tracts, we were able to produce exact sums. The 1990 blocks nest perfectly within the 2010 tracts. So we have the exact sum for each of those. The upper bound and the lower bound is exactly the same as the estimate because there is no doubt about where these people lived. Over here, however, there's 3 blocks that straddle 2 2010 blocks or 2 2010 tracts. So we don't know exactly where those people lived. We make an estimate that 201 people lived here. We use an advanced model. We take into account the 2010 and 2020 block densities in this area. We also use some additional information about land cover, where there was intense development, where there were roads. And we come up with this estimate, but it is only an estimate. So it's possible that everybody lived north of this boundary, and it's possible that everybody lived south of the boundary, and that's how we get the upper and lower bounds that tell you how accurate everything is, or how uncertain it is. There's more documentation about how we do that on our website, and here's an example of something you might do with the standardized data. Here's a change in school age population by block group within the Twin Cities between 2000 and 2010. You could now do this between 2010 and 2020, and this would give you an idea of, which areas have declining school populations, where the schools might be struggling to keep their budget going because of diminished enrollments, or where they might be stressed due to rapidly increasing enrollments. things like that. Our geographically standardized time series currently cover 1990 to 2020 data for 2010 census units. They're available at 10 geographic levels, including tracts and block groups, several other levels. There's a lot of different statistics that we include in those, but it is limited to short form counts. Short form counts are the statistics the census publishes from the census short form that goes out to the entire population. And it's only short form statistics that the census produces block level data for. We rely on the block level data to produce high quality standardized statistics. So we currently limit our standardized data to what's in the short form. The short form includes data on race, ethnicity, age, sex, household size, and relationships, etc. But it does not include all of those other things that are covered by the American Community Survey and the long form: income, education, employment, health insurance, etc. For that, you can use our nominally integrated time series. This would not standardize the geographies, but you could still get data and map it at different times. You could look at the county or state level, units where the boundaries haven't changed much, and we have a much broader range of subjects covered because we do include long form data. So all of these different long form subjects are included. We cover only 8 geographic levels, mostly things that are fairly stable over time, not so much for tracts, but for these other areas. And the years that we cover in these tables are broader than in our standardized. We go back to 1970 with most of our nominally integrated time series, and we even have a couple that go back all the way to 1790 or 1820. Our long form tables currently only include 2 5-year periods from the ACS. We're planning to extend that soon to include all ACS 5-year periods. If you want to standardize long form data within tracts or other small areas, you could use our geographic crosswalks. This is our geographic crosswalks page. You can click on our main page on the left side, find the geographic crosswalks. And we have a great range of explanation and background about how to use that, how you could use them to standardize long form data, and so on. Currently, we have crosswalks that span 1990 to 2010 and 2020 back to 2010 so that you can standardize everything to 2010 geographies. If you choose, we will be adding more crosswalks in the future that go to 2020 units if you want to use the most recent units. We're continuing to expand our collection. There's some explanation here, lots of background. I'll leave it to you if you're interested to look into that or ask more questions later. Some additional resources we have an application programming interface that allows you to access our extract system through an API. So you can do it programmatically. You could write a program to download a particular type of data, and then every year, if you want to update it with new ACS data, you could rerun that program. So you wouldn't have to go through our web interface to select the data that you got last year. You could get it in the same way. And we have another product. If you use R, we have a package called IPUMS R that allows you to manipulate IPUMS data within R. So you can check that out through our developer portal, where we talk more about the API, and you can look up the IPUMS R package if you'd like to learn more about that as well. User support. We have, so we have a little bit more information about IPUMS R and the IPUMS developer portal through our website as well. Lastly, there are many, many ways you can learn more about our products and get help if you need it. I focus first on the bottom of this page. You can learn what we've released most recently through our news, and you can click on any of these links here to get more information about our revision history or any frequently asked questions. There's a user forum where you can post questions and get help from the entire IPUMS community. You can also click up here to get information about how to contact us. Namely, you can email us anytime at nhgis@UMN, or you can follow us at NHGIS on Twitter, where we make announcements about any new data that we release. On the main IPUMS page, there's also support options. You can email our general support email at IPUMS. They can help you with any of our projects, and you can follow IPUMS on Twitter as well. All right. For the last 10 minutes or so here, I want to give a very broad overview of IPUMS USA. So IPUMS USA provides microdata as opposed to summary data, and it is very complete in how much microdata it provides. Going all the way back to the 1850 census, it provides decennial census samples, and it includes all American Community Survey microdata samples through 2020. Additionally, a really cool product, I don't know how many of you would have use for it, but if you want to do some historical analysis, we actually have access to the complete microdata from earlier censuses that are at least 72 years old. After 72 years, census data becomes public, and you can actually inspect the entirety of census data. We do not immediately provide information about individual names. That is withheld unless you get special permission, I believe. But we do have a ton of other information, very detailed about the entire population 1940 and earlier. How would you use IPUMS USA? On the main page, similar to on NHGIS, you'll see an option to get data here, but you'll also see an option to analyze data online. If you take this route, you would be getting a data file to download, similar to how we do it on NHGIS. You would be able to download a text file that looks something like this, and you would also get a codebook and command files that would allow you to load that data into a statistical software package, or to interpret it if you wanted to load it into Excel or something like that. Alternatively, if you choose the Analyze Data Online option, you would get to this interface where you could first select a particular sample that you're interested in. Here I've selected the 2018 5-year sample. And then you can create a custom tabulation. You would choose what you want your rows and columns to be. We also have the option to create a correlation matrix or to actually even do a regression online. But in this case, I'm crossing the Hispanic variable with the metropolitan area variable. And that means that I can then see counts of Hispanic population by metropolitan area. And this table also includes some coloring and some proportions, and all of that is adjustable. You can learn more through various links on that page. If you do want to download a data file, you would use this interface to explore what's available. And this is really useful even if you're using the online analysis tool, because you can use this interface to learn more about all of the specific variables that are in the microdata. We have extensive documentation through this page that describes how concepts have changed over time and when they're available. So to get started, you might want to look for what kinds of variables we have. So there's various types of variables that differ at the household level, and then there's variables that vary at the person level. So for example, if I look at the work variables, I would get this list. It shows me exactly which samples have that variable available. Most of these first columns are ACS samples. Then you can see some decennial samples later on. We have several different occupation variables using different occupation classifications across time. If I click on one of those, this is the variable that uses the 2010 classification. And you can see that different codes existed at different points in time. They didn't all exist earlier in earlier censuses, but they do all exist in recent censuses, or most of them do. Continuing on, you can select specific samples through this option. For example, I might choose the 2025 year and the 2010 5-year, and then I would only have these two columns show up when I'm viewing which variables are available. The way you proceed through this, it's similar to NHGIS. You add things to your data cart. So I have selected 2 samples and 4 variables here, and then I continue by clicking on View Cart. Now I can see what I've included. By default, there's several standard variables we include in most microdata downloads. You can choose not to include those if you want. And now I would continue to the last page, where I can do a couple other really useful, potentially really useful things. I can select specific cases. So I could, for example, limit my sample to just women, for example, or to just people in California. I could also attach characteristics. So this is where you would, if you want to analyze children according to the characteristics of their parents, for example, children of those who are unemployed, you could attach characteristics using this option. The last thing I want to talk about is the limited geography that is in microdata. If you work with microdata, you can get information about region, division, and state. Below states, you can still get information, but it is all tied to this unique geographic unit called the public use microdata area, which is the only unit of geography identified in public microdata over the last 50 years or so. A public use microdata area, or PUMA, has to have at least 100,000 residents in it, so it doesn't get very small. But even with 100,000 residents, we can still identify a lot of useful geographies. They weren't called PUMAs in 70 and 80, they were called county groups. And we also have created PUMAs ourselves at IPUMS for 1960. So you can really use this concept back to 1960. Here's an example of PUMAs in Texas. The dark blue lines show PUMAs. So here's a large PUMA on the outskirts of San Antonio. And then within San Antonio, there's several smaller PUMAs because there's lots of people here. And all of these areas have at least 100,000 people in them. Out here, you need a larger PUMA in order to have 100,000 people. You can see that these things don't always correspond very well to other units. You can identify some counties that correspond to PUMAs, but in other cases, a PUMA is many counties. A PUMA can also correspond to urban areas or to metropolitan areas in different ways. Because of these complex relationships, we try to simplify it in IPUMS USA. You don't have to try to figure out how a PUMA corresponds to a particular city or metropolitan area. You can use specialized variables in IPUMS USA where we have already done that for you. Using PUMA level information, we identify where we can, any county, any city, any metro area, and we report that through specific variables. We also identify metropolitan status and the percent of each PUMA's population that is within a metropolitan area. So you can use that to distinguish rural population or to distinguish particular metro areas. PUMAs don't always perfectly match up with cities. In the case of St. Paul, where I live, the PUMAs match up perfectly with the city of St. Paul, so we can identify it perfectly. In the case of Minneapolis, there is a 1.3% error where the PUMAs corresponding to Minneapolis include the total population of those PUMAs have 1.3% of their population living outside of Minneapolis. We take that into account and we only identify cities where there is less than a 10% population mismatch. This means that we can identify in recent samples only 104 total cities and only 25 of the 50 largest. We can identify many more metro areas. We use a somewhat more generous tolerance of 15% 15% mismatch tolerance, which allows us to identify 98 of the 100 largest MSAs, everything but these 4. So you can do a pretty good job of doing analysis at the metropolitan area level with microdata. This is an example too of our metro variable, which identifies different classes of metropolitan status. We also have a variable that summarizes population density by PUMA for each individual in the microdata. And MetPop, the average metro or micro area population for the PUMA. You can use both of these to study different kinds of variations in the urban-rural spectrum. So every PUMA has a particular average census tract density, which tells you how dense people tend to live within that PUMA, from remote Alaska to the densest parts of New York City, right? And that's on one axis here. On the other axis, we have the average core-based statistical area population. That's the metro or micro area population. Going up to New York City on the far right, or again, remote Alaska, or I think the Dakotas here on the left. And you can see how by coloring these circles, we can see how poverty rate varies across the urban-rural spectrum. In larger metro areas, we can see that the poverty rate is highest in the denser PUMAs, and it's lower in the more suburban and exurban PUMAs. But as you get into smaller metro areas and non-metro areas over here on the left, you can see that all of these areas have higher poverty rates. There's not a density variation like you can see over here. So that's an example of how you could use those variables. In addition, we also have something we call cons PUMAs, which are sets of PUMAs that are consistent across time. We identify, because PUMAs change every 10 years with each new census, we identify sets of PUMAs that are consistent. So you can do analysis across time with consistent units. And we have a web page where you can go to see what those cons PUMAs look like. And that brings me to where can you go to find out more about these geographies? On IPUMS USA, we have online maps and GIS files for PUMAs and cons PUMAs and specialized PUMAs that are called migration and place of work PUMAs. We also have detailed documentation and composition files for all of these things. You can learn more by going to the geographic variables in the selection interface. Click on any of these and you get detailed descriptions of these concepts. You can also find on our main page this geography and GIS option, which takes you to a list of places where you can get boundary files and learn more about all of these units. Okay, I've talked for a long time now, and I'm happy to open it up to everybody else. Before I do, I just definitely want to acknowledge our funders for IPUMS USA and IPUMS NHGIS. And I'll leave it here for a moment. If you want to jot any of this information down, this is where you could reach me or reach us if you don't get a chance to answer, if I don't get a chance to answer your question now. But otherwise, we've got some time to open it up to questions, right?
Yep, thank you so much. This was really helpful, especially for someone who's fairly new to the professional sphere and then trying to learn data. This was like very comprehensive, so I really appreciate this. We do have a couple of questions. The first one is from Carol. She asks, will school data be released based on the 2020 census?
Not through NHGIS. The school attendance areas project that we worked on is now discontinued. One thing that is being released through the 2020 census is school district data. The Census Bureau does collect data and report data for school districts, but not for individual school areas. There is another project, which I wish I'd remembered to look up before I got on this call, but you could reach me outside of this webinar. There is another project that has picked up that work and is trying to produce school attendance area boundaries for at least some school districts. And I know that that is an ongoing thing, but we're no longer involved right now. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. The next question is also from Carol. For school populations, the Minneapolis example of time series, could we limit that to free and reduced lunch school population or some other socioeconomic status indicator?
Yeah, the free and reduced lunch is not in census and ACS data, but the ACS data does distinguish populations by public assistance programs. So you would be able to distinguish population using SNAP, food stamps, and others receiving Social Security or Medicaid, I think, things like that, but not by school. There is a source of data that reports statistics by school. I want to call it, is it the Common Core program? The Common Core data you could link up our school attendance boundary data with Common Core data. We do, as I recall, have a standard identifier for the schools that allows you to join those two together. But you would get the Common Core data from a different site.
Thanks. This is Carol. That is very
Hi,
helpful.
Karen.
Do you want to ask your next question, Carol? Because I know you heard it.
I wanted to make a comment. You know, I was thinking before you started this, that why would I want to go back to 1870 or whatever? But then the more you talk about this harmonized time series stuff, I think that a lot of times in public health, we have to do natural experiments because we can't experiment on people. And so when there's a big change in policy that might affect people, it's good to be able to have these kind of really, really harmonized, good quality data sources to monitor those changes. Like, and you know, like if there's a big housing policy change, do people get healthier somehow in those things? But and right now we've got one coming up, then the abortion access problem may have outcomes that are that start to affect the health of babies and the systems that support kids who are and moms who are you know, we're ready to have babies and have them anyway, you know. So that's why I was kind of thinking that the school stuff would be useful, but other stuff too, that this sort of long-term ability to track things over time really could be useful. And I see somebody else put a question in, so I thought, good. This is from Melanie Poulter. I happen to be from Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the two largest cities in which the PUMA isn't matchable to city boundaries. I may not have that quite right. Can you explain why that is? And is there anything I can do to change this?
Yeah, sorry, Melanie, that's unfortunate. To be precise, there are city boundaries, which would, that's the municipal legal entity of Tulsa. And then there's a metropolitan area, which is usually county-based. And the metropolitan area is a larger area that includes any county with a significant commuting population to the central city. So I'm not sure how many counties are in the Tulsa metropolitan area, but the reason why is just for one reason or another. Oklahoma's PUMA defining agency, there's actually different ways that PUMAs are defined. Quite often state agencies help in defining the PUMAs, and then other cases the Census Bureau does it themselves. They define the PUMAs in such a way that they don't match up well with the 2013 definition of the Tulsa metropolitan area. And it just also is the case that for IPUMS, we use the 2013 metropolitan area definitions. Those are updated regularly too. So I would hope actually in a couple of years, when we start using the new PUMAs and new metropolitan areas, we may have a better match with Tulsa. these things can change. And is there anything you can do to change that? You could, if you need, so 7 counties in Tulsa, I see your response now. Yeah, you could try to match up as best you can with Tulsa. We provide some crosswalks that, that allow you to determine which PUMAs correspond to what. It's also possible, though I think unlikely, that you could identify the city of Tulsa with our data, because possibly the PUMAs match up with the city. But in general, my recollection of Oklahoma is that the municipal boundaries tend to be quite complex, and the PUMA boundaries are simpler. So PUMAs match up with cities better in places where the city boundaries are simple, if that makes sense. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you. You can identify PUMAs that correspond to Tulsa. They just might not match up exactly with either the city of Tulsa or the metropolitan area of Tulsa.
You answered my other question, which was the way which rural urban classification system you use. It must be is it the USDA that puts out those, and you're using the same ones?
The Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, is in charge of the CBSAs. Yep, the core-based statistical areas, which include metropolitan areas and micropolitan areas.
Well, I really feel like I could dig in and use this data that you described. So
Good, good. I'm
helpful.
glad.
Thank you.
Are there more questions out there?
I'm just giving a minute for everyone if anyone wants to write it in or unmute themselves and ask.
People, there aren't very many of us on this call, so you should really ask this guy questions while he's here. Chance.
And for everyone who's still on the call, we'll have the recording up in a couple of days, and I will share a link to that, to our YouTube channel, as well as an evaluation survey for this. And if you could please fill out the survey, because it really helps us figure out what exactly our members are looking for when it comes to these issues. Well, it doesn't look like anyone has any questions. So thank you, Jonathan, for your presentation. Really appreciate it. And yeah,
Welcome. Thank you for coming, and I hope lots of people can benefit from this, not just those attending presently, but those who get to watch the recording.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hopefully I can give everyone back 15 minutes in their day. Thank you for attending. Have a great one, guys.
Thanks, Nishka.
Bye.